Partisan school boards finally approved. A House committee balks at eliminating the statute of limitations for certain sex crimes, plus questions about Diego Morales' overseas trip, and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending April 4th, 2025.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber, working to unite business and community to maintain a strong economy and quality of life.
This week, school board candidates would be forced to choose a political label for the ballot under a bill narrowly approved by the House. School board candidates would have to choose Republican, Democrat, Independent, or nonpartisan to go next to their name on the ballot.
Democratic Representative Kyle Miller, one of the 40 House members who voted against the bill, says it creates lazy candidates and lazy voters.
Because now instead of candidates having to go put forth their own policies, to do their own research, to tell the voters what they want to do on the school board, all we're doing is saying just put an R or a D behind your name and we'll know what you stand for.
But Republican Representative J.D. Prescott, one of 54 members who voted for the bill, says it's about transparency.
Party affiliation, that it's really just the starting point, not the ending point. When you're looking at Republican or Democrat on the ballot, you still have to go through and evaluate the candidate themselves for who they are.
Under the bill, straight ticket voting would not apply to school board races.
What will the impact of this change be? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Elise Shrock, Republican Mike O'Brien, John Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers, and Niki Kelly, editor-in-chief of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting State House Bureau Chief Brandon Smith. Elise, the Senate has this up on their concurrence calendar to send to the governor early next week, which we expect to happen. What will the impact of this change be?
I get what Representative Miller is saying, and when he's saying it makes lazy voters. I think what he's really trying to say is choosing a D or an R is an oversimplification of what really happens in school board races, in which these issues are so granular at the school board level. So I think the worry is that national issues that we see seep down into state and local races could have an effect in these races, and is that fair? And also, it's a juxtaposition to policy. If you look at what happened at the state level, where the state superintendent of instruction was made nonpartisan by this same body a couple years ago. So we want to make the state superintendent of public instruction nonpartisan, but where we have all the control. And then at the local level, we want to make people choose between a party. I think there's some conflict there. I think at the heart of it, though, it makes folks have to choose between a party rather than look at the granular issues that are affecting their schools, which in effect affect their neighborhoods.
Yeah. Even if you don't have kids, school board races matter in terms of the price of your house in some cases, or certainly the property taxes you pay on them. At least for now, we'll see what the bill at the end of the session
happens at 3:30 today.
Yeah. A lot of folks. We had school board members come to the State House and say, "You passed this, and I'm not going to run for school board again because I don't want to get into that. I don't want to do that." We had Liz Brown, who I would say is one of the most political people in the building, say, "I ran for school board when I was starting out in my political career, and I wouldn't have wanted to put an R next to my name at that point in my life." Do you think you're going to see a bunch of school board members go, "I'm out"?
That was the concern I had with it. I mean, and ultimately, if I were voting, I probably would have voted against it, but I'm not, so here I sit. I don't think we made the Secretary of Education nonpartisan. I think we aligned their politics with whoever the governor is, because that's ultimately who's accountable for this. And in this environment, what's the impact going to be? Not huge, because at least right now, maybe 10 years ago, because these issues around schools right now are pretty divided and partisan. Now there's a lot of legislation that goes through Education Committee every week that has, comes out unanimously, comes off the floor unanimously. But there are certain issues, and they're probably the ones that you're talking about in an election, that right now are pretty divided and partisan. That doesn't mean I think this is great, but it means I think the impact's probably going to be muted.
A big part of what was driving this, clearly, I mean, from the testimony we heard at the State House, is people who lost races, particularly in suburban Indianapolis counties, who lost races because they felt like the voters didn't realize, well, I'm the conservative, and I live in a conservative county or a conservative community, so they should have been voting for me, but they voted for someone who's pretending not to be a liberal. Is this going to, are some of those races where we've seen particularly conservative candidates not always win, are they going to start to win?
I would have said shame on those individuals who were crying foul, because maybe they just ran lousy campaigns. Keep in mind that nothing in the former and current statute, which was in place at the last election, would have prevented them from walking around with a billboard that said, I'm the most conservative candidate you'll ever find on planet Earth.
And in some cases, they basically did.
And I'm a Republican, and they could raise the money. They could air spots nonstop if they could buy the time that said whatever they wanted to say. There was no prohibition on calling yourself or running with a party affiliation. But now, of course, it's a different landscape. It is, I suppose, a sign of the times that now the issues that get attention in education are partisan issues. And it's sad, because I think we all remember, well, I certainly do. I know you don't. Your memories don't go back.
Always be careful when you say we all remember.
Yes,
John.
we had an earlier discussion about who remembers hotel keys, and I guess I'm the only one who does remember them. But I mean, when elementary school education and school board decision making was about things about, you know, physical structures and playground equipment, and whether to honor teachers in certain manner or certain programs, after school programs for children. And what a kind of a quaint way to look at things now. I miss that, and I presume a lot of people do. Because I don't think kids ultimately are well served by these sort of the using education and school board races as a proxy for other disputes that in many cases don't really, if you get right down to it, have that much to do with what the kids are learning or not learning.
This, was mentioned in the piece. Straight ticket voting will not apply to school board races because you could have multiple people in the same party running.
Because we're not doing a primary.
Because we're not doing a primary, which is what the Senate originally
But in terms
wanted.
of you asking what the impact, I think it's going to be huge. And you know why? Even though they're not doing a primary, they're applying the two primary rule to who can run. Yeah. That means hundreds of thousands of Hoosiers are not going to be able to run, at least as an R or a D, right. Because maybe they didn't vote in the last two specific ones, or maybe they voted R once, D once, the back to an R, or whatever.
Because I think
that's going to kick out.
It isn't just in the hands of
county chairs,
party chairs,
and I think I have to go back and read the language of the bill, but my memory is that it wasn't a version of the two primary rule. It's just the last two primaries you voted in. I think it's the last two primaries. Period. Like if you didn't vote at all in one of the last.
No, I don't know if they changed it. That's not the current rule.
Okay, all right.
But
you can get waived.
Yeah, you can get waived.
It does.
But also, no matter what, it's going to kick out any federal worker, a lot of workers who receive federal dollars through contracts or grants. They're not allowed to run for partisan office again. I guess it would still count as a partisan office.
Yeah, now that you can run as RD.
Yeah. Even if they said independent or nonpartisan.
Yeah. All right, time now for viewer feedback. Each week we post an unscientific online poll question. And this week's question is, should school board candidates be forced to choose a political label on the ballot? A, yes, or B, no. Last week we asked you whether Todd Young is conservative enough for Indiana voters. We had more voters than usual. They were pretty split. A, yes, was 53%. No, was 47%. If you'd like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Some would argue Todd Young's doing a good job based on those results. Advocates have been pushing for years to eliminate the statute of limitations for certain sex crimes, and a bill to do that cleared the Senate this year, but a House committee gutted the measure this week.
The Senate advanced a bill to lift the time limit for all cases of rape and child molestation. Carissa Siekman has been pushing for the bill for years. She says she was raped as a teenager, as was her younger sister. And Siekman says Indiana has one of the highest rates of sexual assault against high school girls in the country.
We must ask ourselves, why Are our neighboring states providing more justice for their citizens? Why are they valuing their survivors more than Indiana currently is?
A House committee largely deleted the bill. Instead, the measure now lengthens a statute of limitations extension in current law. Right now, if DNA evidence, a recording, or a confession is discovered after the statute of limitations has expired, the case can move forward within 5 years of that new evidence. The legislation extends that to 10 years. Republican Senator Scott Alexander, the bill's author, calls it a small step forward.
It was really good for the committee to hear what they heard today, and maybe that'll change things.
Alexander says he'll continue to push for the original policy change.
Mike O'Brien, I'll note none of us are attorneys around the table, but why, and this is one of those very legal issues, but why do you think House lawmakers are so resistant to this?
Because I think it's a balance, and I think you've got a balance between what's the right time to go back versus, and all the complexities that come with that. Memory, lost witnesses, it's complicated for prosecutors. And the reason I think a lot of lawmakers are resistant to this is because one of the most thorough bipartisan reforms that has passed the legislature in 2 decades was the multi-year process of reforming the code, and they considered this. Yeah. And those were the factors that they took into account. What is the right? Because it's got to be, you have to balance it, and so there's debate on where the line is. But they already went through that. So on this and enhancements and other things, they're really resistant to open that up because it was so well done.
The House in particular has been more resistant to monkeying around with that, in part because of the influence of Greg Stewart, who was a big part of that reform.
And a lot of the
Ed Delaney and Wendy McNamara, the chair of that committee, has really tried to hold the line on let's not do enhancements unless we really think it'll be impactful or things like that.
Or they couldn't contemplate it like they did fentanyl this week. When they wrote that 10 years ago, the IPAC said you never could have contemplated that this was going to be a problem.
Right. But still, it feels awkward to say no to this.
Right. And I'm not an attorney. True. I do work with survivors. And I think what I'm curious about is the approach. And this is something that I don't just see at the legislature. This is something that I'm seeing with the way that survivors of workplace abuses, even in just the political sphere, are experiencing where historically the onus for where these types of decisions are made and centered is on what could be a hypothetical for the other person, and it is not survivor-centered. And survivors have to continuously bleed out and tell traumatic stories, re-traumatize themselves over and over, telling graphic details in these committees, even to see a bill barely see any progress. And tell their stories to the media when we have some of the highest rates of sexual assault of teenage girls in high school. Indiana has one of the highest rates. 1 in 5 women are assaulted in Indiana, 1 in 12 men. 1 in 2 LGBTQIA people are assaulted in Indiana. This is it's a crisis, and so it is a balance, and we have to center our response appropriately.
The thing that strikes me about this particular debate, I think it was Senator Alexander who had a bill a few years ago that would have basically, for all sex crimes, up and down the code, gotten rid of the statute of limitations. Nobody in the Senate side, nobody in the House side was ready to go along with that. And so he's, over time, narrowed it to these 2 crimes. And there are some cases of rape that have no statute of limitations, same for child molestation. And it's if you do it with a deadly weapon, if you cause serious bodily injury, if you drug the person. It feels kind of difficult to tell a survivor, well, your rapist didn't use a gun 5 years. Your rapist used a gun forever. Does that make this particular debate a little harder to say we're just trying to balance that?
And I think lawmakers have kind of caused that issue on themselves. Yeah. I mean, I completely get the due process concerns with breaking, having no statute of limitations for any. I mean, that's just not, it's not fair because people die. How does a prosecutor, How does someone remember where they were 20 years ago on X date, you know? I mean, those are real concerns. And so I think having no statute of limitations goes a little too far. But they've opened the door with some rapes, treating some rapes differently than other rapes. And so that is problematic for them.
Something that struck me in talking to Senator Alexander after this committee hearing was, you know, he's been working on this for a few years. And this was a big step, getting the House committee to not just hear the bill, but also to at least, well, I mean, they did something. They did make this small, what he called a small step forward.
Doubled it. I mean, that's 100% increase.
Yeah, but only,
from 5 to 10 years.
If the new evidence is uncovered. But the thing that struck me was Representative Joanna King, who's one of the members of the committee, came out to talk with some of the survivors who testified afterwards. And I was waiting there to talk to one of the survivors, one of the advocates. And Representative King was talking with them, and they were telling her about this, some of the things they talked about in the testimony, which is some people cannot come forward right away. They are physically unable to because of the trauma they've suffered, and that it can take a decade or more to finally be in a place where you mentally feel ready to do that. And that was something that I think, and watching her, my perception was that Representative King was kind of learning this and going, okay, we need to think about that. We need to try to address that idea. Is this very small step forward a bigger step in the larger push to make this policy change?
Look, there's no good answer here. You're talking about people who were victims, and our hearts go out to them, and it's a tragedy. The best outcome would be, hey, let's not have crime to have to worry about how to prosecute it. But it is, I think Mikey's the right word, it's a balancing act. Our hearts go out to the victims, certainly. But I mean, our system, let's think of the sort of the meme of Lady Justice with blindfold, where you can't take your heart and your sentiment out of the justice system, certainly. But our system is built upon the notion of deciding things with the head and not the heart. And when you talk about crimes that may have occurred 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, how does one forget alibi witness? Your point's well taken. I don't even know what I was doing, so how am I going to find whether it was Uncle Joe or Aunt Sally that I was watching the game with that night? It's tough. There's no good answer. But I think what maybe comes out of this is by doubling from 5 years to 10 years. In those cases, you're right, it's not all cases, but in those cases where DNA evidence or some other sort of evidence comes forward, which is a game changer. DNA evidence was not, you talk about fentanyl, was not around when these statute of limitations were first imposed. Their DNA was the stuff of fiction.
I mean, I was looking back, and I covered when they put in the time extension for the discovery of new evidence, 2015, so. Yeah, I mean, that's, again, it's trying to address
which makes sense for a lot of reasons, because look how many people have been prosecuted because they fell through the cracks the first time, but not because of somebody coming forward with an allegation in a timely or not so timely manner. It's basically they showed up in a screen for DNA.
We've also come a long way and not far enough yet on stigma. Yeah. I mean, there is underreporting that happens, and even 10 years ago, the amount of underreporting. Yeah. So what do we tell people who are ready to finally come forward, to your point, who,
you missed the window, yeah.
But if you address the stigma, I'm not arguing the point. Again, these are victims, our hearts go out to them. But if you address the stigma, maybe that then addresses the issue of having to wait 20 years before you are mentally and physically able to address that.
It's complicated, important work.
Yeah. Well, according to State Affairs Indiana, Secretary of State Diego Morales this week continued to refuse to answer questions about the funding for his recent 10-day trip to India.
A press release from Morales' office said he attended a tech conference in India to strengthen Indiana's economic ties with one of the world's fastest-growing economies. The Republican official also visited American officials in New Delhi and Hyderabad. But Morales won't say who paid for the trip, only saying it was privately funded. Democrats accuse Republicans of rubber-stamping what they call corruption in Morales' office. Governor Mike Braun last week told State Affairs and the Indianapolis Business Journal that the trip was outside Morales' responsibilities.
Niki Kelly, this is not an isolated incident. We have questions about Diego Morales buying a luxury vehicle for his office, the cost of $90,000. No bid contracts, which he is absolutely allowed to do, but giving them to folks who are giving his campaign a lot of money.
Might not be allowed to do them soon, and
Yeah,
there's a
that's
bill
true.
on that.
How much longer can this kind of stuff go on with Diego Morales?
I don't know. I mean, the list is incredibly long at this point between, catering meals for his staff, giving a bunch of bonuses that make up for salary, the no-bid contracts, hiring his brother-in-law. Now this, and this isn't even the first international trip. We know he went to Hungary last year. And I remember getting tips from his own employees who were like, he's not here and they won't tell anyone where he is. And then it finally surfaced online that he was speaking at Hungary CPAC. So, I mean, to me, the issue is this. If you were there and you were speaking as the Indiana Secretary of State, which he was, then it's a state trip and you should have to explain why it's related to your job. If not, it's a campaign contribution, and that would be illegal during a budget session.
Now, governors of the past have gone on economic development trips like these, and traditionally they were paid for the last decade plus by the Indiana Economic Development Foundation, which traditionally did not tell you all of the people who were giving money to it. You knew some of them, you didn't know all of them. So
he could do the same. He could say,
that's my point.
X group paid for my thing. That doesn't mean we know who funds X group.
Right. Does he need to start answering some of these questions about things like this?
Yeah, I think you need to over-disclose this stuff for this reason. There's little things that can kind of start piling up on you politically. And there's no reason not to. I mean, the political downside of not answering is usually far worse than just the avoidance. Yeah. Which in a lot of cases politically, we see examples all over the place on both parties. Of the non-answer
being worse than
is way worse than the answer, and then you answer the question and everybody moves on.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, if this is all happening out in the open, then what's happening in the shadows?
I don't even care that you went to India.
And it's all, and this is all, cush cars, treatment at a time when Hoosiers are wondering if their kid's going to get their EAP, if they're going to have Medicaid, if they are, going to have Social Security. It's not good.
This brings me to our next story, which is Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith is defending his office's budget after he asked state lawmakers for a $3 million funding boost before the recent Senate Appropriations Committee for faith-based initiatives.
In a statement this week, Beckwith detailed budget cuts he's made within his office, including choosing not to renew contracts for professional development training programs, a graphic design service, and social media and image hosting services. The reductions total about $164,000 of savings. Beckwith also purchased a new vehicle for the office, an $88,000 SUV that he says was necessary because the old vehicle had mechanical issues and a larger vehicle was needed to accommodate Beckwith's staff. Meanwhile, he wants $3 million for faith-based initiatives, telling lawmakers the money could go towards helping address mental health supports and homelessness and crime reduction programs. In an interview with the Indiana Citizen, Beckwith sidestepped questions about whether he'd use the money to fund so-called conversion therapy.
John, in the context of the budget discussion that Indiana is currently having, does the fact that he purchased this vehicle actually make it less likely that he'll get the funding request he asked for?
Probably so. I mean, the flippant answer is probably, let's hope that this new SUV, in addition to all its other nice options that have been added on, has very precise rear view cameras and all kinds of sensors about lane changes, because the optics here are clearly a problem for some folks in that office. And let's hope that maybe technology can compensate for the lack of optics. I mean, this might be okay in a year that everybody's flush with cash, but in a year where you have agencies, what was it, a 5% across the board?
For most agencies.
Most agencies, in turn, those that answer to the governor.
Is this all about, to that point, is this all about timing? Like, yeah, this would be fine. $3 million more for faith-based initiatives might be fine in a normal budget year, but in this budget year?
No, not in this budget year. And let's level set on the term faith-based initiatives. White Christian nationalism initiatives, because Indiana has lots of different faith practices and non-faith practices. The issues that he wants to solve through this, there are many, many bills, housing bills, and other issues that have been addressed through legislation from, different parties. Saying that you want this amount of money to push your agenda is not only fiscally irresponsible, it is irresponsible from a policy side of things. Hoosiers want someone who is going to lead with integrity and who is going to lead, not in this way, is the nicest way I can say it.
Very quickly, unlikely that he gets that funding request?
I think it'll be a part of it. When you build your glass house on Doge, they're going to look at everything. So
Right.
maybe next to you just, and Mitch,
Maybe just
these are
do
easy
it next
political
time.
drive-bys though. Mitch got hit for this, Pence got hit for this, Diego got hit for it. It's an easy
on the
thing, but
legislature.
the reaction's even worse when you're preaching burn the building down.
Yeah, and it's on the legislature to not get televangelized into allowing this type of expenditure.
All right, that's Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Elise Shrock, Republican Mike O'Brien, John Schwantes of Indiana Lawmakers, and Niki Kelly of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at wfyi.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next time, because a lot can happen in an Indiana week. The views expressed are solely those of the panelists.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber, working to unite business and community to maintain a strong economy and quality.